My biggest worry is that people don't recognize we're at war. We are at war. You may live in a nice, calm community and you may think that you're secure, but in a digital world, your assets are equally as easy to someone around the corner as they are to someone in North Korea. If a hacker could have tried 10 permutations in one day, they may now be able to try 1,000,000 in one day, just to give you some order of magnitude. So that's one potential risk of AI.
Today on Man in the Middle, we have Robert Maxwell, who's the founder and CEO of TGT Solutions. Robert has spent more than 35 years both in the finance sector and the technology space, which gives him a really unique perspective when it comes to the landscape of cybersecurity, especially how businesses should be approaching and looking at cybersecurity, looking at it more as an investment to the company rather than as a cost. We cover topics around social engineering, the way that AI is changing the cybersecurity landscape, and also seeing cybersecurity as something that's an ongoing process and never arriving at the point where it's completely done or completely finished. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Robert Maxwell.
All right, welcome everyone, and I'm here with Robert Maxwell from TGT Solutions. When you're based in Ontario, I should say, Canada. Is that right, Robert?
That is correct, sir.
Fantastic. I really want to appreciate you joining us today. And I think for people who are tuning in who may not know you, my understanding is that you, before being involved in the technology space, you've got an accounting background. Is that right?
I am. I'm a chartered accountant in the UK.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you tell us a bit about that? I'd love to hear your journey into the technology space, and more particularly, because it's not something we always see. We usually find people who are leading technology organizations tend to have that background of being, say, a technologist. So I'd love to hear how the perspective of being a chartered accountant actually uh, enriches your position right now with TGT Solutions.
Thank you. I qualified as a chartered accountant in the 80s. So I'm in London. We're in the city. There's lots of, I suppose you'd call it now, IPO activity, lots of companies coming onto the stock market. And one of the things you noted was lots of enthusiasm about money, cash, but not a lot of enthusiasm around technology and how technology played a role in the development of companies. So I learned very early that there was a place for technology. And if I, so to speak, spoke both languages, the language of technology and the language of finance and accounting, I could have a seat at many tables that I would otherwise not have been invited to. And as it turns out, technology has consistently evolved. And because we've got lots of experience with financial services and so many other kinds of businesses now, it just fit very naturally to use my background to have conversations about technology and the difference it can make for a business.
Do you find that it shapes the way you approach problems even today, like having that background,
Absolutely.
having that understanding of like
Absolutely.
finance and
Mhm.
yeah,
And it's not just about finance, it's about all the concepts you use in finance. Concept of risks, for example, the concept of things must balance, the concept of a return on an investment. Matter of fact, that's what my book is based on. My book is based on cyber model dividend. The whole concept of a dividend presumes that one has made an investment and one should expect a return, and one should be able to quantify the return that one is getting on an investment. Technologists tend to focus a little too much on technology and get swept away with it without asking and answering the tough questions.
yeah. No, that's really good to know because I know you've talked a lot about even in not particular to cyber, and obviously we'll get more into the granular of that. Uh, you sort of talk a lot about the profitability of the implementation of technology, because
Absolutely.
oftentimes we fall back on seeing it as a cost rather than an investment, like what you were saying just before. Can you talk a bit more about that framework and how that perspective organizations can have around looking at the profitability when applying technology more broadly? But I'd love to hear it more specifically around cybersecurity frameworks as well.
Mm. Many times, the decision to do a particular piece of technology or to adopt it centers around what a competitor is doing or where people think the market is going in a technology context. And very rarely is enough thought given to the financial aspect of it, and not just the financial aspect of it, but the reward aspect of it. You've got to think in terms of the payback financially, payback in terms of the team that's working on it, how it fits into the longer term business strategy. Too few companies give these things full and proper consideration. And that's why many technology projects tend to run over and tend not to deliver the promised value because the due diligence wasn't done up front.
Yeah, right. And in the specifically in the cyber realm, where do you see
Mhm.
that um, those sorts of projects going, I suppose, wrong when it comes to not having that due diligence applied to it?
So when we think about cyber, we think about a company having an overall model of protection. What's the model you want to employ? Maybe a bit of staff training, perhaps lots of prevention, perhaps many layers of prevention. So one should think in our minds in terms of a whole cyber model to defend against intrusion. And then when you think in terms of that model, you have to think in terms of cost and in terms of reward. What's going to give you the highest payback? And you have to have a very layered approach. And we very much believe that the model, whatever model each company chooses as its best representation of a defensive posture, needs to then be thought through in terms of investment. You have to invest here to get the return later. What's going to differentiate your company because you've done this? What makes it so difficult for intruders to get in? What makes it easier for you to protect? Thinking through a layered strategy may for example, think about which data do I really need to protect? Which customers do I really need to protect? What are the risk thresholds that I'm not prepared to go beyond? It's a very different way of thinking about a technology problem, but I can assure you it works very well.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then is there also that additional step, because nowadays the conversation around cybersecurity isn't so much around only can we prevent this from happening, but also what do we do when the inevitable does happen? Because
Does
it's not
happen.
it's not so much a case of if it will happen, it's when it will happen and how severe that might be. So can you talk a
Mhm.
bit around the planning that comes around, I suppose, incident response and also I suppose the fallout from those incidents?
Let's perhaps think about that more broadly.
Yeah.
Incident response is just one of several policies in which an organization should invest. There should be a business continuity policy. Yes, there should be an incident response policy, but if you're going to have an incident response policy, you also need to have some sort of tabletop exercise to exercise that incident response strategy. So we believe that you need a very comprehensive approach, and one needs to invest, first of all, in those policies. One needs to invest in showing people, you showing your own team why they're there and what the value is. One needs then to invest in the tabletop to make sure that you are testing it for what it's worth. And if you do that well, you do a great service to your company in terms of protecting it in the longer run.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And my question would be, because I know you've spoken about it before, Robert, is around complexity and
Mhm.
the I guess like is there a is there a risk involved by adding more and more layers that things can become too complex for an organization? So in other words, there might be too many tools. There might not be um, a I guess like a simplified framework to apply when depending on if it's like before an incident, like saying incident response, and then the continuity um, policy you have as well. Can you talk a bit about like what level of complexity is required? I mean, I know it's going to change. It's going to vary between organizations, but if you could talk a bit on that.
We believe that you should be able on one page to draw a diagram of your cyber defensive model. We believe
Okay.
very strongly that if you think in terms of layers, each layer should speak for itself and should have a representation that is reflected in reality. You used policies as an example just now. Having policies is one layer of defense. Suppose then an organization chooses 10 policies which they need to have. Let's think about bring your own device. There should be a policy around that. Having spent time with each of your team members, that should A, be easy to enforce and easy to maintain. So while a layered defense may have several layers to it, they should be logical, easy to represent, easy to manage, and certainly give you the protection you're after. It does not need to be excessively complex. We do advocate that you have to have an owner for it. Not everybody in the organization is going to have that depth of knowledge. They need to know about their piece of it, but there's somebody in the organization who can create a one pager and who can speak to it and explain its benefit in a defensive situation.
Yeah, no, I love that having it on a one pager, just being able to.
Hmm.
I suppose yeah, like that. There's a simplicity can actually be. It doesn't mean that it's not useful. It's
Hmm.
simplicity means that it's just easy to understand and communicate, right?
Yes. If you think of any organization, I can create a profit and loss on one page for that organization. I can
Sure.
create an income statement no matter how large that organization is or how complex it is, which tells a story. In similar vein, we believe you should be able to create a one page model to diagrammatically represent what you have done and how the layers best protect your organization.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, just on that, Rob. Like, I sort of want to. Speaking of stories, I want to
Hmm.
see if you have any stories because that's a lot around what this podcast is around. When you like, I suppose like we could start here. When you walk into a company or an organization for the first time that they're coming to you asking for your consulting services or whatever it may be, what are usually the most common challenges you're coming up against, or the most obvious things you need to address within an organization in relation to cybersecurity?
The most common thing that we encounter is a leader's perception of it being a cost. And we
Mm,
spend a lot of time reframing that thinking to cause them to realize it's an investment. Most people drive a vehicle. That vehicle probably cost, if I use US dollars just as a frame of reference, let's say north of 40,000 US dollars. It's an investment because you have intuitively figured out it's going to last me 10 years, it's going to take me 500,000 kilometers, it's going to make it easy to get from point A to point B. You have intuitively factored those things in and made the decision to make that investment. It's going to transport my family. It's going to help me at night when I need to get from point A to point B. You, you, You have reasoned through at great speed the value to justify the investment. In the world of cyber, most business people are not able to do so. They hear cyber, they think cost. Most people are in the mindset that we want to minimize or reduce cost, and therefore cyber is out the door. When we reframe that and now it becomes an investment to secure the assets that you've probably spent 10, 12, 20 years building, there's a very different mindset. This is why I referred earlier to the model and the layers of the model. One doesn't start on day one by trying to do it all. In this particular quarter, we'll do this particular layer. Next quarter, we'll get to another layer. And one can build a beautifully layered defensive posture over time, which protects you when you most need it. And even though you may get an attack and you may have a loss, again, you've minimized that loss, you've localized it, you've contained it, which is to your benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to that initial conversation that you're having, Robert, around reframing against a cost, what are you usually, I suppose, communicating to that leadership team around? No, this is an investment, and like I guess highlighting how it is an investment.
Right. So I speak to the length of time they've been in business. I speak to the amount of time they have invested to build whatever business they've got. Most of the time, they've been in business for many years and they've built something that's quite admirable. And I bring to their attention, did you really build this for everybody to come steal it from you? At which point the obvious answer is, well, no. Well, I said, well, you've got physical locks on your doors, but you don't think you need a few digital locks as well in a digital era? And so I'm able to, again, use my background and help them to recognize that they've been a bit penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah, interesting.
One really does need to make several investments in cyber, not one, not two, and they don't all have to cost a lot of money. I mean, staff training is a great one. I mean, it doesn't cost you a lot, but it's probably the best investment you can make.
Yeah, and then I guess again that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Robert, with the model, right? Like there's different, I suppose, phases or layers, however you want to talk about it, that you can be implementing, and slowly, your organization is becoming more secure. But I wanted to go back and ask because, again, initially it's seen as a cost, and I'm not so familiar with Canada's laws, but I imagine a lot of companies initially as well seeing it. Okay, this is a compliance thing. We need to make sure that we're compliant. Is that usually where the conversation's starting, and then therefore it's like, okay, we're going to be compliant, and therefore it's going to be XYZ cost in order to do this. Let's get it over and done with. Is that initially the attitude?
Those types of thoughts do come up. What we're seeing increasingly is that for an organization to participate in a particular value chain, we want to do business with that organization, but to do business with that organization, we must now become more cyber resilient ourselves. So we see a lot of value chain discussion. This is my client. He's much bigger. He now says I have to, therefore I must. We see a lot of conversations around industries where, for example, the mortgage brokers industry says you must now do this many hours or you must do this. So yes, we see people being increasingly encouraged by their associations, their value chain in which they participate in, to get involved. But what I really want to tell you about stories is it does require a leader to pay some attention. Leaders tend to be very dismissive. I don't have time for this. And our quick comeback to that is you don't have to have time for it, but you must then empower someone else in the organization who will make time for it. And if you're a 3-person organization or a 2-person organization and it's not you, then it's got to be the other person. And if you're a 10,000 person organization, you still have to do the same discipline. And it's the same with financials. If you may not like being your own accountant or your own banker, but you've appointed someone to do that work. You must do the same with cyber. So we spend a lot of time helping people to recognize this is not something you're doing. Well, you may have come to it for that reason, for whatever reason you were forced to, but you really do have to invest in it for your own protection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask because you mentioned some of the initial things that can be done
Mhm.
in terms of I suppose like the highest leverage things that can be done initially in an organization, and you mentioned employee training.
Mhm.
Um, are there other things that you notice that are the sort of highest leverage thing? And actually, just starting on the employee training, why is that the case that it's the highest leverage? Well, I don't know if you said it's the highest, but one of the higher leverage
It is
activities
it is in my
to do.
mind the
Yeah.
highest leverage activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that?
We're still very gullible as a species. Bottom line, even the most staunch and stoic people that I know can be tricked. And those who invest in breaching your defenses have spent considerably more time than you have thinking through what story, what angle will work to break through, and they will use whatever social engineering they must to get past you. So, our human character is still a strength to us, but it's not a great strength to us digitally.
And have those sorts of social engineering attacks, if we call them that, have they evolved? I mean, you've been in the technology space for more than 30 years. Have they evolved? Have they gotten more sophisticated? And if not, is it just the same old tricks still work? I guess.
Jeremy, the same old tricks work, but they're evolving by the week, literally
Wow.
by the week. The bad guys think up things by the week, quite literally. And
Okay.
and people say, well, I've seen that, I've heard that, and I smile at them and say, how much time have you got to sit and think about all the bad permutations and combinations that can occur? And just think about that alone. Are you going to spend 40 hours in your work week, presumably? Are you going to spend 40 hours thinking about all the bad things that can happen? Well, they've got hundreds of people who do nothing all day long but figure out the next devious thing to do. Do not presume yourself impregnable. Do not.
Yeah, and can we spend a bit of time on that, Robert, as far
Hmm.
as what are the most common, and can using like more the, I suppose, social engineering angle. I guess what are the common ones, firstly, and then I want to get to you're saying they're changing week to week. Are there ones that have surprised you, like that have you've seen more recently that might not be on people's radar at the moment?
One of the things that we notice is hackers spend a lot of time studying an organization. So they know the websites that you frequent. They know the types of roles that you play and the types of things that you will do. And I cannot tell you how many times we have seen a URL that has been made to look almost identical to the URL that you frequent. I cannot tell you how many times we have seen the letter O supposedly appearing in a URL that you frequent, and it has been replaced with a zero. And I can tell you that oh, I know this one, you just go click. And after the fact, you point out, that's not your URL. That's not the one you thought you were going after. We see that all the time. It's very easy to fool people. People
Yeah,
work at speed in an organization these days. They don't have time to carefully review every URL with which they work. They don't have time to inspect that everyone with whom they think they're corresponding is indeed the person with whom they're corresponding. So getting past people isn't as difficult as you might think it to be, because people don't take the time to look.
Yeah, and then that can introduce the whole host of ways to attack, I suppose. Just that fact alone.
Just that alone.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we see quite often is most organizations don't have a proper bring your own device policy. And how often do you take your device home and your son or daughter, we just want to play a quick game on this because it's just easier because your computer is faster, daddy. And all of a sudden you've introduced a threat vector that you had no clue you introduced. We see it all the time. Somebody had their favorite game on it, their favorite game. Their son or daughter has their favorite game on it. And all of a sudden, you've introduced a possibility or a set of possibilities you hadn't even thought about. Most organizations do not do their due diligence in terms of enforcing a bring your own device type policy. Most people have these wonderful thing called mobile phones these days. And most people want to use their mobile phones to do most of the things with which they do on their desktop. But very few organizations stop to think through, what's our mobile defense strategy? We've done all this stuff on our desktops, on our servers. What have we done on the mobile devices that will now connect to us? I tell you, most organizations have not thought it through. So without spending the whole day telling you all about it, just those things alone introduce very high levels of risk to many organizations.
Yeah, and just before we move off it, what generally ends up being the best practice in regards to the bring your own device policy or policies related to that?
Mm-hmm. One of the things we recommend is, unless and until you have the tools to enforce these things, just don't allow people to use their own device. Very simple. Have a zero tolerance policy in respect of it until you can assure me that if John is allowed to bring his own device, you've got a set of standards that you've asked John to comply with, or you've got a way of scanning John's device to ensure that he's not introducing a risk to your environment.
Brilliant. Okay. And continuing that thread around I suppose the increasing vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose just because it's 2026, I have to ask you about AI. Because I want to ask on two sides. What sort of problems has AI introduced on the side of the attackers? So in other words, has AI provided attackers with tools that weren't previously there, and therefore made us and organizations more vulnerable, Robert?
Yes. Very simply, if a hacker could have tried 10 permutations in one day, they may now be able to try 1 million in one day, just to give you some order of magnitude. So that's one potential risk of AI. The second potential risk, which I think is the greatest risk actually, is that most people in an organization voluntarily go to some AI site and provide access to the data. So we're not even talking about hackers using the technology to come in. We're talking about people within the organization who have a lot to do, opening the door, throwing their data out, because of course ChatGPT or whatever tool will do something for you supposedly quickly, and they think, "Ah, wonderful, I've got a result," not realizing they opened the door and threw the data out or threw the access out. So the bigger way in which the challenges are coming is that people are opening the door and letting others in.
So that's actually probably the more riskier side. Just like it's not. It's
Absolutely,
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're just putting the
yeah,
data out there, aren't you?
yeah. And most leaders I speak with have no clue as to how much their people have opened the door and put the data out of the organization. It's amazing to me. I say to people all the time, how many of your people do you think are on ChatGPT or Claude or whatever? And they look at me with this look, and I'm like, well, I can actually tell you, probably 90% of them have put the data out the door already. And they look at
Yeah.
me like, oh dear. Yeah.
And can I ask a really naive question? Because
Mm-hmm.
let's use Chat GTP as an example. Like, let's say you're putting sensitive data out there, which maybe in the minds of the employee they think is safe. It's secured in their profile, whatever it may be. How would a malicious person or actor potentially gain access to that?
Several different ways. On the way out, they can read the traffic. They can
Mm.
hack into the cloud storage where that data is supposedly safe.
Yeah.
Many times people give stuff away that they don't realize they're giving away in terms of other people or other places where the hacker can go. There's so many ways in which people make themselves more vulnerable by using these large language models.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. And I guess it just comes back to um, having a having a policy or a guideline to say like how tools are being used, right? That's really like I suppose how you end up combating a lot of these problems.
It's a start. There is no one defensive strategy that does everything you need it to do. But at least if you make people aware, this is our policy with respect to AI, not just because we're trying to be bad and limit you, but it's a cyber consideration. Once you do that, people go, oh, right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Thank you for sharing it with me. And you, as an employer, should be saying, here are our preferred channels for you to use. And you, as an organization, can then take some steps to ensure that the channel you've recommended has some
Mm.
protections around it. Hmm.
Yeah, okay. And again, following that thread of AI, we talked about it from the attacker side of things.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know if it's similar in your organization, but I suppose the cyber frameworks that are being set up in the organizations that you work, Robert, how is AI being used to assist cyber professionals and I suppose increase the defensive capability out there?
One should presume that there are tools out there which use AI in a positive way. So the endpoint detection tool you're using should have an AI algorithm that's cycling through much more quickly to recognize threats. The SIEM tool you're using should have AI built into it these days. So whatever tool you're using should, and I'd suggest you be looking at tools that have these things built in, because the cost of you trying to do it yourself is prohibitive. So you want to be leveraging tools and technologies where those things have already been thought through and can now be used for your defense. In other words, shift some of the work to your trusted vendors.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm with you. Like passing on that capability to the
Mm-hmm.
vendors that you're using, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I suppose most executives would believe that their company is secure because they, say they passed an audit last year. Is that the wrong way to look at things? Do you think?
Completely. Absolutely completely. The best security, in my mind, is having a person on your team to whom you have delegated the responsibility to be ever vigilant. So somebody may have brought me their model last quarter, and this is our model. And my only question to them is, what have you got planned for the next quarter? And that person should be able to say, right, happy that you asked me that. Here's what we're going to do now at level 4. Here's the augmentation we're going to do. And I'm going to have that. Okay, now I'm ready to have a conversation with you. Anybody who brings me a model to say, well, we've done it, we've got this sussed, it's okay. I'm like, no, you've just set yourself up for a bad fall. You have to be constantly becoming more aware and taking more steps to better defend yourself. There is no resting on one's laurels here.
Yeah, I love that phrase. I love it. And we're talking earlier about compliance, Robert, and again, like it varies country to country, like what's and the related organizations. But if you were to strip away compliance and compliance were to disappear tomorrow, are there things that you would do differently or not?
One of the things I would do differently is to continue to make our clients and our prospective clients recognize that better cyber is a competitive advantage. Even if you don't have to be compliant because your industry hasn't yet enforced it upon you, recognize that if 3 competitors are going after a particular contract, and one of them can demonstrate that they are more cyber alert, cyber aware, more sensitive to your cyber need, I believe that's a true competitive differentiator and will become increasingly a true differentiator.
Okay, I love it. Again, looking sort of like towards the future, what are some of the worries you have in relation to cybersecurity for the future, Robert?
My biggest worry is that people don't recognize we're at war. We are at war. And I'm not speaking just about kinetic warfare, as in the Russians and the Ukrainians, or the Israelis and the whoever they're fighting this week. I'm talking about the war between those who have and those who want what they have. There is a war going on, and people need to be very cognizant of the fact that you may live in a nice, calm community, and you may think that you're secure, but in a digital world, your assets are equally as easy to someone around the corner as they are to someone in North Korea. And that mindset causes you to realize that you have to do a better job of defense. It's nice that your institution, your bank, your credit card company is doing some work, happy about that, but you have a lot of responsibility in this war as well. And the war is between the haves and the have-nots, because those who have something that the have-nots want. And that's something that needs to be very carefully thought through. You've just spent 10, 20 years building a beautiful business, and it's got a reputation, you've got a team, you've got clients, you've built a whole range of tangible and intangible assets, each of which is worthy of defense from an unknown assailant, whether it's a state-sponsored assailant or a group of young people who just are having some fun. You are under threat. There is a war going on, and you have to be very cognizant of that, and then begin to plan a cyber model, an investment strategy, and take the necessary defensive action to protect your business.
Robert, you were talking about, some of the stories that you come across where people aren't facing the reality of being hacked.
Let's give you one example. We received a note from a lawyer, and she was asking us for money. So instantly, having just read the note, it could not possibly have been real. And just as a civic duty, we called her up to say, just so you know, you've been hacked. We don't know you. You don't know us. We've never done business, but here you are sending this note to demand money. And her approach to this matter was, oh dear, I'm so sorry that you received this note, but it couldn't have been me. Like, obviously it couldn't have been you. But here's the kicker. Her approach was, but I'm not too worried about it because I don't have too many of my clients and their data on the system. And I politely pointed out to her, Madam, you do realize that 1 million of these letters could be going out of your mailbox every day, and you don't have a clue about it. She paused for a minute, and then I said to her, and you realize if somebody loses money and goes to your bar association and brings this to their attention, you will now have to take your hard earned, legally earned money and go defend yourself. And you, as a lawyer, should know how long it will take to defend yourself against a claim. At which point, she went very silent. I don't know whatever became of her because, as I said, we were just making her aware that she'd been hacked. But this happens all the time where people whose primary business does not appear to be a computer business. We've seen it happen to a baker before, where he's a baker. He doesn't give a toss about what goes on the internet. And we brought to his attention all these things are going out in your name. Somebody's going to get hurt here. The most recent one we had was the Cape Cod Bar Association, the Bar Association, the association to which many lawyers belong. Their website got taken over by, oh right, a Chinese gambling site. So things happen all the time, and unless people are constantly vigilant, it happens very easily to people and they don't know it. Suppose it's gone on for a week or two before you know it. You cannot begin to quantify the kind of damage that could have been done.
And like that kind of denial, do you think it's a case of, I don't know, like shock? They just can't accept that it would happen to them.
I think it's a combination of three things. First of all, it's disbelief because most business people are not devious to that extent. So if the baker is a great example, he's thinking about waking up, getting production done so that by this time he's got whatever delivery he needs to do done. His mind is focused on that task. So when you come at him literally at left field with your site's been hacked and this is what's going on, he just can't make the shift quickly enough. How could this be? There's a how could this be factor there. That's one thing we've noted. The other thing we've noted is people just don't understand what people can do once they've got your credentials because they're impersonating you. So most people aren't sufficiently devious to think through. They could be sending, as I just mentioned, 1 million letters a day out soliciting funds in your name, but of course the account's not yours. They just can't think to that extent about how devious people can be. And the third thing we've noted is people just don't know how do I even begin to deal with this? What do I do? Do I pull the plug? They don't know what to do. And when those three things hit people, they can be quite lost. They're just, as you've commented, they're just shocked and paralyzed as a result of it. Most people don't have a cyber expert on speed dial. You have the police on speed dial, but of course, when you call the police, they tell you straight up, we don't deal with this. Call this number instead to report that it's happened to you. And there's very little help available after these things have happened.
And that's where I suppose the proactive approach becomes a much
better way of
productive. Yeah. Okay.
It's very difficult when you go to somebody who's not on the computer every day to explain why they must now care and pay attention to these matters.
Yeah. And do you think there's also extra element? I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it, but do you think that some businesses don't believe they're important enough to be hacked. Let's put it that way.
I would say that north of 90% of the businesses with who, the organizations, not just businesses, we can be speaking about not-for-profit organizations as well,
Sure.
in their minds are not important enough. We're not big enough. We're not important enough. We're not something, and you can fill the line in. We're just not, we're not interesting enough. Not realizing, of course, that that's precisely why you are of interest, because you've got, if I look at my own firm, we've got 30 years of credibility. Well, if I can trade on your 30 years of credibility to do some nefarious activity, that a hacker says, great, I'll do it.
Yeah, and then even another example could be you're somewhere in the supply chain of a much, in their mind, much more important company or much bigger company, whatever it may be.
One of the stories I like to tell, about 10 years, 12 years ago, there was a hack at the Four Points Hotel. All these millions of records were stolen, and people for many years couldn't figure out why those records were stolen. Turns out the Chinese wanted them because they figured out that some people who had stayed there were the ones who were giving the information to people who they did not want to receive the information. So they were stealing data not to get at the hotel. That was not particularly important. They were much more interested in who stayed, when they stayed, so that they can draw parallels between who was given information to whom. So there's all kinds of reasons which the data you have is important to someone else for a reason that you are not aware of.
Robert, we are unfortunately getting to the end of this conversation, but before wrapping up, I want to give those listening an opportunity. If they wanted to learn a bit more about you and your company, TGT, I don't know why I can't say it. TGT
It's
Solutions.
Easy. The Genesis team, TGT.
Oh, I love that. That's much better.
We were the first, and we will continue to be the first to do many things to help organizations. We're not going to build that whiz bang new piece of software, but once it's built, we're going to figure out how to use it to help you to profit through technology. That's how we think about the world.
Fantastic. And just one more sort of note on that, Robert. How do what do people usually come to you for? So, like, what initial problem are they usually looking to face?
In the realm of cyber, they usually come to say, look, our client now says we've got to get up to speed on this. Can you help us? People come to say, we think we've been hacked. Can you help us? People come to say, we've heard a lot about this. We don't understand what the fuss is about. Can you help us? That's where the call usually starts. And where we try to go with them is to say, this is not a situation where I just apply some ointment and it'll be over. This is a time, money, and effort commitment over the long haul. You don't get well protected overnight. You just don't.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, if people are having those challenges or issues, you can reach out to Robert. We'll have those links in the description so they can find you where you are. But Robert, I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully we can continue some of these threads on another episode. But
would love to do so.
Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, sir. Have a pleasant day.
Fantastic. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.